Welcome everyone. Thank you so much for coming along for yet another talk on the Women's Climbing Symposium online series that we've been running throughout this lockdown. Really pleased that you've all made it here again. Thanks so much. Thank you so much to Adidas 510. We they are supporting us so much to put these talks on, and yeah, thanks for everything that they do. Tonight we have got a really interesting talk, and one that will resonate with every female climber just about. So yeah, this is a biggie, and I think it's something that, well, certainly me, I just feel like I should know more about it when it's such a big part of my life. And yet, it comes, it goes, we pass it by, we get on with life, and we just sort of try and ignore it if we can. And if we can't ignore it, it becomes this big thing. So yeah, we just thought this is a massive part of women's lives. And yeah, let's get Dr. Natalie Brown in, because she is an expert, which is absolutely fabulous. And she's a climber. She works for the Welsh Institute of Performance Science, researching about the menstrual cycle and its effects on performance. So we're really lucky to have Nat Brown here tonight to give us some information and start this conversation about something that's so important.
Thanks so much for such a lovely introduction. I'm really excited to be here, and thanks for inviting me to come in talk to you all today. I'm just going to share my screen quickly. Hopefully you can all see that. So today I'm going to give like an introduction really to the menstrual cycle, but also kind of, as Emma said, just start the conversation. And I'm really keen for everyone to, as you feel comfortable, to share your experiences or your thoughts on some of the content today, and kind of try and get really interactive and talk to each other about the menstrual cycle. It's something that sometimes we keep secret, or we just try and manage ourselves, and sometimes talking about it and becoming more familiar with what's going on can be really helpful. So as Emma said, I am I'm a researcher based between Sport Wales and Swansea University, researching all around the menstrual cycle and how that affects females, whether that's from grassroots and participation up to elite female athletes, so kind of Olympic level, things like that, and supporting them to manage their training performance in relation to the menstrual cycle. So really broad, but always some really common aspects, whether it's someone who is just starting exercising or at the elite level. There's definitely some similarities between the work I do across the board. First of all, I've got some slides prepared, so I'm going to go through some slides, but there's very much interaction throughout. As Emma said, either put your hand up or put your responses in the chat box. I'm happy with either. It'd just be great to hear back from you. First of all, though, here's some quick facts about the menstrual cycle. And just as I talk them through, I want you to just think about whether this is something that's familiar, or actually some of these facts are new information for you. So first of all, sounds so obvious, but the menstrual cycle is a biological process. So, it's not something that we should be worried about talking about, or that we should keep secretive. It is a normal biological process. Like we talk about heart rate or so many different aspects of training, it is exactly the same when it comes to the menstrual cycle. It's not just a period, so it's not just about the time when we're bleeding. It is actually a cycle of repeating a pattern of fluctuating hormones. They can be so individual between females, and each of you will have your own unique hormonal response and your own unique menstrual cycle. And that means everyone might experience completely different symptoms, which we'll touch on a bit more. A typical cycle, it's always this, like within a textbook, 28-day cycle, but actually a typical range is anything from 21 to 35 days. So if you're within that range, that's what we class as a normal cycle length. And that time is from day one of your period until your next period starts again. And that is the time that we calculate between that range. But it may vary in length between each cycle. But we typically say for a regular cycle for it to not vary more than 5 to 7 days each month. Day one of your cycle, I've already said, is characterized by the bleed. So that's also like, we can also call that the period or menses or menstruation, different words for that. And on average, females start their periods around 12 years old, but that can range anything from 8 to 15. But we always encourage, it's super important to have started your period by the time you're 15. So first of all, if anyone is happy, is anything there, you know, is that really familiar, or is there anything I've said there that you're just like, I didn't even know that? Because that's definitely a common theme when I've done this before. I've had some girls in the past just be like, I've not known any of that, which is why I now start off with that quick introduction. I'll have a little look in the chat box for any of you to comment. Yeah, so definitely you could have a regular cycle, but it can vary by up to 7 days. That's still absolutely fine. It's when it's starting to go beyond those 7 days where we'd start classing that as irregular. Normally you'll find a completely regular period will be, you might vary by like 2 to 3 days is what would kind of be typically normal, but there's nothing to be concerned if it is up to 7 days. Some of you haven't thought about this in a long time. Yes, that's a really, it's kind of why it's always a good one to start. That actually, if you're monitoring or tracking your menstrual cycle, your period is day one, and that is day one of your cycle. So the first day you bleed is what we class as day one. And then you can work out how long your cycle is after that first day. See, Rebecca's just put there, a Garmin watch has helped you get that on track. So is that something that's been monitored as a result of that? I actually use the same. I use the Garmin app to monitor my cycle so that I know how many days my cycle is, and making sure that it is as consistent as possible. I don't always get that spot on. Like, definitely I shared last month that I think I had all of a sudden, like normally I am 32 days regular, maybe 33. And then last month, all of a sudden I was like 44 days between my cycle. And that was just from being super stressed. I'm not really looking after myself. So it's always good to use that to have a check-in. Clue is also really good. That's what I used prior to getting the Garmin watch. And then the Flow app, I think that's another one that is used quite frequently. Someone's actually just commented, I think as well, just started using Flow. So yeah, there's so many different apps out there. They're the three, so either Garmin, Clue and Flow I find the best for just kind of monitoring symptoms if you don't want loads of information, or even like sometimes some apps give you notifications like you should be feeling like this at this time, which for me, I'm like, I don't really want someone to be telling me how I'm feeling. Whereas other people find that really helpful because they kind of go, oh, okay, that's why I'm feeling that way, is because of my menstrual cycle. Okay, if I just move on to the next slide. So question I want to ask you all, as I mentioned, it was the menstrual cycle is caused by fluctuating hormones. Is anyone familiar with how many hormones are involved in controlling the menstrual cycle? 4. We've got 4 so far. No idea. That's also absolutely fine. So I'm going to go through it today. No idea. Lots. just give you a few more seconds for anyone else that wants to put in any thoughts on how many hormones are involved. Enough to make me not feel good. We'll definitely talk more about that shortly. Can only think of 2, but I think there are more. So there are actually 4 hormones involved. And those 4 hormones are follicle stimulating hormone, FSH, and luteinizing hormone. They're the 2 that are released from the pituitary gland in the brain, and they interact with your reproductive system, which is where you get estrogen and progesterone released. And it's the interaction between the brain and the reproductive system that causes the different fluctuations. And from the reproductive system, basically that is the ovaries and the egg being released. I'm not going to go into too much detail and turn this into a biology science lesson, but it's how that they interact and are released that actually cause the different variations. So for example, when you're on your period, your hormones are actually at their lowest. And then before you go into ovulation, that's when you start getting a peak in your hormones, in luteinizing hormone. And that's actually what the luteinizing hormone from your brain sends signals to your reproductive system to say, release an egg. So that's ovulation. And then following ovulation, then that's when your body's preparing itself to receive a fertilized egg. So that's when progesterone is really important. It develops that uterus lining so that it can prepare you essentially to be pregnant. And if that egg isn't fertilized, that's when you get this really quite rapid drop in both your estrogen and progesterone. And it's what can be associated then with premenstrual symptoms. So I've put that there so you can kind of see how the hormones released from the brain interact at different peaks, and it's those peaks in interaction that cause the changes really in the estrogen and the progesterone. But from a perspective of how is this useful for us, I like to take out those LH and FSH and break it down a little bit more so that we can really see how those symptoms interact at different phases of the menstrual cycle. So what we've got here is, as you can see, before in the previous image, there was just a follicular phase and a luteal phase, but it's actually really nice to split that down even further. So early follicular phase is when you've got your period. So that's typically when you're bleeding and your hormones are at their lowest. This late follicular phase, when you've got a peak in estrogen, that's actually associated, and it'd be great for you guys to see if you're familiar and aware that actually that's normally a time when we can feel really energetic, super confident, really motivated and feeling really strong. And then you can post ovulation, people vary in how they feel around ovulation. Some people feel at their absolute best and others feel maybe a bit more tired for a couple of days. And then you go into this phase where you've got increase in progesterone and increase in estrogen, but that's actually a time when you might feel quite productive, and you might sleep really well because of that increased progesterone. But at the same time, you might also feel completely uncoordinated and your spatial awareness might be all over the place. And then you go into this late luteal phase, and I've actually put there premenstrual. So that's the time when we associate with PMS symptoms. And at that point, I want to share some of the comments that when I've spoken to elite female climbers, that these are some of the feelings they've said, especially we associate when I ask, how do you feel with your menstrual cycle? It's normally that premenstrual stage that everyone comments on and their symptoms that maybe make them feel not great. You've got some there saying, I feel a bit lousy. I'd rather eat chocolate and watch TV on the sofa. Can anyone else relate to that feeling? It's really annoying for performance. It's more like the core performance and impact of bloating. motivation levels, sometimes just not having the energy or the motivation to go. And then I've put another couple of variations on there as well, of thinking about actually when you're younger, how did that feel compared to now? And that feeling of worry of leaking. So I just want to give an opportunity now, Rebecca, if you can help out to put everyone maybe into some breakout rooms, just to go away and have a chat with each other of what is their experiences of that kind of more premenstrual stage and any symptoms they experience. And then we can kind of come back together in maybe like 5 minutes. I hope everyone we had a really good chat in the breakout room I was in. Is anyone happy to share any of the conversations they had, either in the chat or unmute and kind of share any conversations?
I don't mind doing our group as well.
Yeah, go for it, Emma. I was just reading the chat as well.
We had a really nice discussion. Not everyone had time to have a go, like, get involved, but it was really good, and we actually talked more generally about each of our experiences, but then got on to the pill and how sort of easily it's just dished out to people without any education about how it might affect you in later life and how it might affect your cycle in later life. So yeah, that was one of the topics that was, in fact, I think all of the people who spoke in our group had experience of the pill, and 2 out of the 4 people who spoke had come off it. In fact, all of us had come off it, but 1 was still on. So it was like a full range, and everyone was on it for different reasons. But the education around it is just poor, because none of us really knew when we first went on it what it would actually do to our bodies long term.
Yeah, and that's actually really good actually to pick up on straight away, that what I've talked around with the fluctuating hormones is a natural cycle without contraceptives, but actually taking any form of hormonal contraceptives really changes that, and it's much more, I suppose the one word is like flatlined, so you might not get those really changes in emotions, but at the same time sometimes you don't necessarily feel quite yourself or know how, those days when you've got estrogen that makes you really motivated and makes you try really hard, but on the flip side of that is contraceptives are really, other than obviously being for the purpose of contraception, can be really good for kind of managing when you're on your period and being able to control. So especially if you're, for example, going away on a long trip and you don't want to have the hassle of for like a couple of weeks going away on a climbing trip, and you don't want to have the hassle of dealing with your period, and it can obviously help manage that. That's great to hear. I'm just looking at a couple of the other comments in the chat. We all found we get a bit overly emotional at random things. It'd be really interesting to find how any of you find that in relation to climbing. So actually the things like falling and leading become more of a stress at any time for you. I know it's definitely something that I've had conversations with others about, fluctuations in motivation and in performance. We very much in our group talked around changes in how we feel from a strength perspective. So actually sometimes just feeling quite weak at that time, maybe feeling we can do loads more endurance, but actually feel quite weak when we're doing that. And the other thing we discussed was around sleep, and actually getting quite poor sleep the week before a period, which then affects performance as well. Yeah, someone else can relate to feeling super weak and less motivated to push yourself. And again, is that kind of like why does that all interlink? I've definitely found it does, that actually you're not feeling 100%, so you maybe don't push yourself that bit harder to be able to lift a heavier weight or do a harder boulder problem or try a harder route, depending on what aspect of training you're focusing on. Feeling clumsy as well. Does anyone feel less coordinated trying to do different moves when you're climbing at different times. So again, that is the variation in hormone levels, and actually that's kind of the interaction of progesterone that can make you feel a lot more clumsy and affect your spatial awareness. As for joint pain, be interested to know what time in your period you find you get more joint pain, because that can be quite common actually before ovulation as well, because estrogen can affect the how lax your tendons and ligaments are. So you can get more movement in your joints, which can actually make them feel kind of a lot more pain. But on the flip side of that, also premenstrual, it's really common to get kind of more back pain. So many different things that you guys are sharing. So joint pain during PMS, which could be linked to, so a lot of PMS is caused by, so premenstrual symptoms are caused due to inflammation in the body as a result of those changes in hormone levels. And obviously with inflammation, that can present itself in different ways for different people. And for some that might come through joint pain. Definitely one of the key things, and that's probably from my experience, is actually that head game in climbing of actually, if I feel a bit more emotional and a bit less rational, I think is probably the best way to say it, that all of a sudden, you know, something that I've maybe done the week before, that I've been super happy climbing above a bolt, all of a sudden becomes way more stressful, or I'm more scared, and I'm like, what, can't, it's more not being able to rationalize that definitely affects me. This is great to hear everyone's experiences and for you guys to be sharing all of this. Rational or lack of is the perfect word for it. Thanks. That's definitely how I've described it. Sometimes you feel ready to take risks, but definitely notice that throughout a month. So as I said, with that peak in estrogen, that can be a time before ovulation where actually you feel way happier to take risks, and you're also more confident and kind of maybe just go for things a bit more, compared to where you're maybe had a change in emotion, feel more cautious, and that might be linked with being clumsy or not feeling as strong, and it can affect how much you're feeling like taking that risk. I'm just going to move on a slide, but if you guys want to keep sharing in the chat, and I'll just keep picking up on that, because it's really great to hear you all sharing your experiences. So we can talk through this page. I'll just pop up whilst we continue to talk, is actually just some of the, so these were all symptoms that were reported when I spoke to female climbers. So there's so many different things that it can affect, which can mean it affects day-to-day life, it can affect us in climbing, but there's absolutely loads it might affect. So the most common symptom is cramps, so stomach cramps, which normally are kind of maybe the day before in the first 1 or 2 days of a period. Bloating, feeling dizzy, feeling faint. And for some of you, you might only experience one of these symptoms, and that might be whether you have a natural cycle or if you're taking any form of contraception. For others, you might literally feel like you tick every one of these boxes. As I said at the start, it's just really unique and really individual based on our own cycles. I want to eat all of the food. Is that a common feeling in a lot of people? I definitely get way hungrier, but actually that's because you do have a shift in your metabolism after ovulation. So you actually, you are naturally more hungry, but you also sometimes crave food that can make symptoms worse. So actually a lot of processed food and a lot of sugar are the two things that we know actually can cause menstrual cycle symptoms to be worse. So actually trying to have a really balanced, healthy, nutritious diet can actually really help reduce premenstrual symptoms, especially if you get them quite severely or quite a lot of them. Carb cravings, yeah, that links with that change in metabolism. So naturally you shift from more of a carbohydrate metabolism before ovulation into a fat metabolism during your luteal phase. So that's actually sometimes why you feel like your endurance is way better. But it also means, especially with being really active, it means you can crave those carbs more because your body wants a more immediate source of fuel that it's not naturally accessing. Chocolate, there's definitely no reason not to have chocolate. Dark chocolate is better than milk chocolate. And it's all just about the amount that you have. So just trying to not have like absolutely loads and binge on it. Because yes, that sugar intake might make some symptoms feel worse. And definitely lockdown and has had quite a big impact on a lot of females and made their periods really irregular or made their symptoms worse. And that's been linked to kind of the stress, topped with that kind of natural craving to want those sorts of foods before your period of meant. It's made it a combination of, it's been quite difficult. I definitely noticed that, and I actually in the end before, like, I could quite happily not have much chocolate, and I just got into a habit during lockdown of just being like, oh, just have a little bit of chocolate, I feel that'll make me feel better. So actually last month I was like, right, I'm gonna stop having some, so I've limited myself to like a little bit of dark chocolate once a week, and I actually feel loads better. But it just becomes something I got used to. So yeah, it's just kind of managing the quantities is always a good thing. Are there any other symptoms on there that anyone wants to specifically ask about, or just want to know more about, or was just completely unaware that might have been as a result of your menstrual cycle? Bad sleep. So bad sleep can be affected a lot because one of the main things with sleep is the thermoregulation. So actually, I think actually someone's just said that as well, that after you ovulate, your temperature naturally rises. So your resting temperature is higher in that phase from ovulation to the start of your period. And so during that, it can actually, when you're sleeping, make you feel a lot more restless, feel a lot hotter, and that can disturb your sleep and give you poor sleep the week before. Just looking to see if there's any others. Reduced coordination. That is actually just the direct effect of progesterone and the interaction with that on your brain, and how that kind of causes variations in coordination and spatial awareness. Dizziness, lightheadedness, I think that's normally quite linked to that kind of energy levels, and kind of you can have changes as well with the temperature, and the combination of the two, you kind of sometimes don't have as good thermoregulation and decreased energy levels that can cause you to feel dizzy or lightheaded. Okay. Would be good to map these on a graph. Okay, we'll remember that, because that could be something that we can pick up on in the next session, to actually go through specifically when these symptoms might occur, and then potentially some different management strategies as well of how for each of those that might be able to then specifically help. One thing I have put there around symptoms is they shouldn't ever be debilitating or stop you from completing your daily activities, whether that's training, whether that's work, just day to day. they shouldn't ever be that debilitating that they stop you doing anything. So I do always say, if your symptoms are that bad, that's when it's worth going to speak to your GP to see if there's any underlying conditions, medical conditions, or anything that they can advise that might help with that. One thing I have put up though is, one thing is sometimes hard to work out is the difference between, I call them life symptoms, and your menstrual symptoms. So actually, when is it just actually day-to-day life that's making you feel more anxious, or making it harder to sleep, or feeling more tired, those sorts of things. So that's when we started the conversation actually with a lot around different apps to monitor and track your menstrual cycle. And that's actually when that can be really useful, because it can help then you distinguish what symptoms you get as a result of your menstrual cycle compared to what that you maybe get from work and just day-to-day life. So then you know maybe which ones you need different strategies or different approaches to help manage those. And also the interaction of your life symptoms with menstrual cycle symptoms. So actually, if you had 1 month when all of a sudden you've got way more symptoms premenstrual, and actually, is that because you've had a super stressful month at work, or different, you've done loads more training, or you've changed your diet, and that can be really helpful for just trying to work out what is your cycle and what are your symptoms, and maybe how you can help manage those in relation to climbing as well. Just some extra ones that I've put up, really specific to climbing as well. We've already talked around risk and that kind of fear factor, mentioned strength and core tension. One thing I haven't mentioned yet, again, it'd be good to hear, is pain tolerance. Does anyone find everything hurts a little bit more? So your skin feels more sensitive the week before your period? Or the other one is problem solving. So, like when you're, there's a big aspect of problem solving with climbing. Is that something that you struggle more with when you're at different phases of your cycle? I'm loving this. I've got lots of yes, yes, and yeses. Is that all to the pain tolerance and how your skin feels? Again, that's linked to kind of that effect of inflammation, and also just how we feel, not being able to push yourself as hard, and being much more cautious. It's almost like we go into a little bit of a protective mode, where our body's like, we need to protect ourselves. It's preparing you to actually be able to be pregnant and reproduce. So in some ways, it's almost like that extra protection. So it can make everything feel much more, but also much heightened awareness of everything. So that's when sometimes your skin can feel much worse. And also you've said, I think someone has said as well, of struggling to focus, which prevents figuring out problems. I sometimes call it brain fog, that I just can't quite see and clear things going on in my head like I can at other times. You've just got this kind of blur of things going on. And sometimes that can be really hard to distinguish, but think about what different things you could do in climbing when you're feeling like that. And also just being a little bit kind to yourself sometimes. So not giving yourself a hard time if you're feeling like that, and just think, well, actually, maybe I'll try something that's, maybe a little bit easier, or something you're more familiar with, so that you can help manage that. I think brain fog is a life symptom. So yeah, again, that's great, distinguishing between what is a menstrual symptom and what is a life symptom, so you know how to manage those two differently. So I've put on there, what are your experiences of the menstrual cycle? And I've kind of given you a few more thoughts and symptoms we've discussed. So I think it'd be really great to go into some breakout rooms again, have some more of these conversations between us, see if it's kind of sparked any thoughts or any familiarity with people. And then we'll come back in again share some of those experiences, and potentially get some of your thoughts on what you'd find really useful to know in the next session. So Rebecca, are you happy to put us into breakout groups again?
Absolutely.
Hey everyone, hopefully everyone's made it back into the main room. I'm going to start off with some of what we discussed first of all, if that's okay, and then everyone else, again, please share anything that you're happy to, that you had a discussion about, and also, as I said, start putting in the chat box if there's anything that you'd really like information on and covered in the next session, because we can start pulling all that together and I can really kind of focus that session on any questions you guys have got. So we actually talked about hydration and feeling bloated and weight gain in the week before a period. So definitely there was comments around feeling maybe a lot heavier, feeling bloated and putting on a lot of weight, so maybe even like 2 kilos. And that seemed to be quite a kind of common amongst us all in our group. So one thing I did say, which I'll share more widely for everyone else, is actually when you feel like that, actually sometimes the last thing you do is to drink enough fluid and become dehydrated, because you already feel really bloated. And but actually it could be that also has an impact. So staying hydrated can actually really help making sure you're clearing those fluids out. So if you feel bloated and that's a symptom you experience quite a lot of, then really try and focus on staying hydrated, might be helpful. Would anyone else like to share? Oh, is there some comments in the chat as well? Yeah, if anyone wants to, I'll read through the chat and shout some things out that we discussed. But if there's anything that anyone wants to talk and share, please join in the conversation. Negative mental health effects when on the hormonal contraceptive pill. I think that can be quite common. And one thing with hormonal contraceptives is sometimes you're kind of given one option, and that option for a contraceptive might not be the one that works best for you. So I always advise, if you feel like that, to go back to your GP and actually ask if there's an alternative option. It doesn't mean to say you have to come off hormonal contraceptive if that kind of works well for you, but there just might be a different option that is much better and doesn't affect mental health as much. Just to say, Anna commented that they were talking around the Curious Climber podcast with Hazel and Mina. That they did a really good conversation with Stacey Sims, so there's some really good information on there. We discussed high energy on bleeding days versus some of us being fatigued on bleeding days. Definitely, I find actually that varies. So the first couple of days of bleeding, I feel maybe more tired. I want to kind of do more, maybe even more like yoga, stretching, and kind of lighter climbs that aren't quite so intense. But then after the first couple of days, that is sometimes when I feel my strongest. I climb my best. I feel really focused. So it's really, really varied between different people. And actually having an awareness of that can be really helpful. So now when I'm the first couple of days of my period, rather than being like, why can't I do this? I actually just go, okay, today might not be a great session, but actually what can I do that I'm going to enjoy and still come away really positive? And that's actually helped loads. It means that I always enjoy climbing. Don't ever have days when you just give yourself a hard time when there's no need to. Any tips on how to stay active on your period? I definitely, again, I mentioned a couple there. Sometimes just doing something a bit easier, backing off a little bit. I find things like yoga, really focusing on my mobility and my flexibility is a really good opportunity to do that. It's something that I sometimes push to the side because I want to do other things, and sometimes actually listening to myself, not feeling great, need a bit more recovery. They're things to really prioritize during that time. Definitely quite a few comments around contraceptives coming up. Discussed how tracking helps us to understand how we feel, but a double-edged sword to give you an excuse. Hopefully then maybe next session what we'll do is actually discuss some management strategies for different symptoms. So actually, you know, rather than being it an excuse, you can just be maybe proactive and think about ways of how you can manage those symptoms so they don't affect your climbing. Definitely common that for some people that you might have to try different types of pills or even different forms of contraception to find one that works best for you. Definitely, if you don't feel great, if it's affecting your mental health, you don't feel like you, definitely go back and see if there's different options for you. Again, it's maybe something that's not always discussed, but kind of, I know I was definitely given one form of contraceptive before and that was fine. And then they said, oh, it's exactly the same, just different branding. So I took it and it really affected me. But for ages, I just was like, oh, it must just be me. Until I actually spoke to a friend to say, oh, it's just made me feel awful. And they'd actually had a really similar experience and changed their contraceptive pill and felt loads better as a result. So it's definitely something to be aware of. Just going through, there's loads and loads of comments. I'm sorry if I don't pick up on all of them. I'm just trying to go through and answer a few of them. Fears of leaking. That was another thing that we discussed in our group actually, and someone else has also commented on that, of just being worried about doing certain moves, and are you leaking, especially obviously when you're in your harness and the position you're in. Different ways to manage that. And there's so many different options now. I definitely find a menstrual cup is really great. There's also so many options now as well for period pants, which actually at first I was just like, I thought they just sounded horrendous. But actually I think they're absolutely great. So sometimes as well, if you've got you use a cup or a tampon and you're still worried about leaking, just using some of those can be using those underwear can be a really nice addition to kind of avoid that worry of leaking. And you don't even notice, they're super comfortable. Loads of you saying that you love your menstrual cups. Definitely, it took me ages to start using a menstrual cup, and then when I finally did, I was like, why have I not been doing this? Because it's just really comfortable, really easy to use. Yeah, I find it really, really, especially when I'm active, way more comfortable than using tampons when I'm active. Someone else also saying period pants are amazing. They are way, you know, if you prefer to use pads, they are just way more comfortable than that. And kind of, yeah, just feel more comfortable when you're moving in them because you don't even notice. So yeah, I find those quite good. Climbing's actually improved my faith in sanitary products. So yeah, that's it's surprising what you can do. And I think just, you know, if it is something you're worried about, maybe try a few different options, try something a little, you know, new, maybe, you know, try a cup or underwear and see if that feels better for you. But period pant suggestions, I really like Wooka wear, so WKA. Someone else has also said that. Lux thinks there are two other ones as well, and I think Hey Girls do some quite nice ones, but I haven't tried those. And then there's one other that I'll have to remember. I'll try and put that in the next session for any other cups and underwear that are really kind of good and that you could try out. Someone else saying thinks it's really comfortable. Which cups are best? I can only talk from personal experience that I've used a salt cup, so SAALT. But I know people all use different ones. There's moon cups. So yeah, there's loads of different ones. I found the salt cup really soft, really comfortable. The only thing I will say as well with salt is you can get shorter and longer ones. So the shorter ones are great if you've got a lower cervix compared to the longer ones. So if, for example, in the past you've tried using a cup and just had the stress of not being able to get it out, that's maybe because you've got quite a high cervix. So maybe look for a slightly longer cup, and then there'll be less stress of trying to get it out. That's from personal experience, I can tell you about that one. Moon cup, really comfy. And you can cut the stem to suit your length. Yeah, so there's loads of different options with the cups. But yeah, they're definitely something that are, once you get used to them, and it does take a couple of goes to get used to them. The first time I used one, I bravely was like, came on my period and was hoping to go surfing. So I was like, do you know what? I'm just going to embrace this. I'm going to put a cup in and go surfing. It was absolutely great whilst I was surfing. But then in the back of a van, trying to work out how to get my cup out for the first time was a bit more disastrous. So definitely try it at home a little bit first if you're not so confident. How do you empty and clean a cup in a public toilet? Generally just try literally empty it out and put it down the toilet. You can get wipes to take with you to clean them. If you can, in some public toilets, if there's a sink within the toilet, to rinse it out. But the main thing is if you can empty that out, put it back in and just rinse it when you can get to some fresh waters. Probably normally what's best to advise on that one. And you can actually keep them in for like 12 hours. So actually quite a lot of the time you can actually manage without needing to take them out during the day, which I also find really convenient, especially if you're climbing outside. There's not access to toilets. Sometimes like just knowing you've not got to deal with anything can be quite nice and just easier to cope with, manage. Yeah, definitely. Actually, there's probably way less blood in there than you think will be in there. But again, you can just manage that and get different cups as well for if you have a light or a heavier flow. Just so, and again, once you know that personal preference, you can look into what different cups are available. If there's no more comments or any more questions, please feel free. I'm aware that we've kind of been talking for an hour. So yeah, if I'll pass over to Emma or Rebecca. But if there are any more questions, please put them in the chat and I'll be more than happy to ask.
Yes, stick questions in the chat. No, that's absolutely fantastic. And you know, it's been brilliant. I've learned so much in that one talk. I really don't know anything. I can't wait for the next one. So yeah, thank you so much for that. I've got more questions bubbling up in my head, so I guess everyone else is the same. Thank you very, very much, Nat. Really, really appreciate you coming along and getting involved and bringing all your knowledge to this talk. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for being part of this, and we will see you again at something soon, hopefully. Take care.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.